Okay, let's unpack this. Forget the typical overnight success stories you hear. Today, we're diving into something maybe even more compelling. How someone took a stable, $80,000 a year job that they genuinely detested and turned that dissatisfaction into a multi-million-dollar online content empire. Building these faceless YouTube channels at their peak were generating upwards of $200,000, maybe even $300,000 in a single month.
Wow. Yeah, that's a level of scale and diversification that's truly impressive. And we're pulling insights directly from the source material you provided, which captures this expert's journey and strategies. It's this whole stack of knowledge, really, covering everything from the nitty-gritty of building and scaling online businesses, mastering outsourcing, team management,
Right.
to his unique take on content strategy, and even some really sharp, maybe sometimes controversial views on broader societal systems and, what it takes for personal growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our mission here is simple. We want to give you the shortcut. We're distilling the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from all this material, whether you're curious about starting something online or maybe scaling something, wrestling with how to build a team, or maybe you just want to understand the mechanics behind these massive online operations and perhaps gain a more critical view of the world. We're going to extract the core lessons, surprising facts, and actionable ideas just for you.
Exactly. Think of this as getting inside the head of someone who built this remarkable system, all based directly on the information you shared. So where do we even begin with a story like this?
Well, the source takes us right back to the beginning. It wasn't some, grand entrepreneurial master plan from day one. It started with that classic immigrant aspiration, right? For the American dream, find a stable job, work hard.
Yeah.
And he did find one, that 80-year role we mentioned. But the key detail is just how much he hated it.
He uses really strong language in the source, saying he really, really hated it. That kind of visceral feeling is often the fuel for big change, isn't it?
Definitely.
And one interesting point in the source is how he views his younger self. He describes being a bit of a loner, not having many friends. He actually thinks this worked to his advantage when he decided to ditch the job for something as unconventional as YouTube back then.
Huh. How so?
Well, apparently when you don't have a huge social circle, there's just less external pressure, right? Less judgment from peers about doing something totally outside the norm. Starting a YouTube channel probably felt less weird or risky because there wasn't this built-in audience ready to, question him or criticize him.
Yeah, that lack of social friction. I could see how that might have made the leap easier.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
It really does. And obviously the leap paid off. Hugely. Millions of dollars generated, nearly 2 million subscribers across channels. But the source highlights a really critical point in his journey. He hit a ceiling.
Yes, that's crucial. He could get to around, what was it, $20,000 to $25,000 a month when he was doing absolutely everything himself.
Right.
But he just couldn't scale past that, no matter how many hours he threw at it.
And according to the source, the reason was, well, simple but profound. He was trapped. Trapped by what he calls the artist mindset, or maybe a limiting belief.
The artist mindset, yeah.
He thought he had to do every single task himself. The writing, the editing, the thumbnails, because only he could do it with the quality he demanded.
Right, that belief that quality is tied only to your personal, direct effort. His mentor apparently pointed out something critical, that if he didn't figure out how to disconnect his time, his hours worked, from the money he earned, he'd just be building another job he'd eventually burn out on.
Just like the one he left.
Exactly. So breaking through that belief, that was the key step. That's what unlocked those much, much higher revenue numbers.
Okay, so the key was outsourcing. But how did he actually do it? It wasn't just like flipping a switch and hiring a huge team overnight, was it?
No, definitely not. His approach, according to the source, was very deliberate, very staged. It details how he started with the easiest things first. Getting a virtual assistant for small tasks, hiring someone specifically for audio editing, simple stuff.
Okay, build momentum.
Yeah, and as those little pieces worked, he built confidence, right? Confidence that other people could actually meet his quality standards. And this led to what he described as this kind of reverse outsourcing for video editing, which is interesting.
Reverse outsourcing? How does that work?
Well, instead of giving a new editor the crucial beginning of a video first, the most important part, he'd start by having them edit just the last 30 seconds, or maybe the last minute.
The less critical part.
Exactly. The psychology there is fascinating, isn't it? It's about proving to himself that they can deliver quality on a small, lower stakes piece. Once they could nail the end, he'd give them the last 5 minutes, then maybe the whole video. eventually scaling up until entire teams were handling full edits.
And he followed a similar path for things like thumbnails and eventually even the writing.
That's right, a gradual handoff, building trust and systems along the way, and now his role is much more strategic, like a master chef, as he puts it, overseeing the quality, the vision, rather than personally chopping every vegetable.
That makes sense. So this brings up the question of who he hired and where he found them. The source highlights his strategy around international versus, say, American workers.
Yes, and he strongly advises against trying to find that one unicorn employee who can do everything that jack of all trades.
Why is that?
Well, they're expensive, for one, hard
Yeah.
to find, and it creates a single point of failure in your system if that one person leaves or gets sick.
Right. So instead,
Instead, he broke down the roles very specifically. Writing, thumbnail design, video editing, audio editing, separate specialists. And he found significant advantages hiring internationally. He mentions places like the Philippines, South Africa, the Middle East, Africa.
okay.
According to the source, workers in these regions often see roles paying rates like, say, $6 to $8 an hour for a skilled editor as a genuine dream job. Yeah, because it offers a quality of life potentially far superior to local opportunities. And he contrasts this with American workers who might, understandably, view similar remote roles as maybe just temporary stepping stones.
So the implication is international hires might offer better rates and potentially higher long-term motivation and loyalty because the job means more in their context.
That seems to be his experience. Based on the source material, the impact on their life can be really significant.
Okay, so clearly defined roles, smart international hiring strategy. What was the absolute hardest part for him to outsource?
The source is crystal clear on this. Writing.
Writing. Why writing specifically?
His explanation is that there just isn't a large pool of writers trained specifically for YouTube. YouTube writing, especially for the kind of viral content he creates, needs to be story-driven, emotional, really conversational.
Right, not like a blog post.
Exactly. Most online writers are trained maybe for blog posts or SEO articles, which tend to be more keyword-focused, informational. It's just not built for holding attention in a dynamic video format.
So how did he crack that nut? It sounds absolutely critical to his whole operation.
He basically had to reverse engineer his own success. He went back, analyzed his most viral videos, identified the common structures, the emotional beats, the patterns, and from that, he created templates, almost like fill-in-the-blank guides for his writers.
Wow, okay.
And then he trained them specifically on his process, his templates. The goal wasn't perfect, 1.1 replication of his style. That's probably impossible and inefficient. It was more about getting them to maybe 90% of his style consistently, using these structures and general rules. It was about leveraging systems for scalable quality.
And for video editing, he mentioned a specific method for speeding up output. A secret.
Yeah, he considers this a bit of a secret weapon. Instead of having one editor slog through an entire video, he'd have different editors work on specific segments simultaneously. Maybe one does the crucial first minute, another tackles the middle, someone else the end.
All trained in the same channel style, presumably.
Exactly, all trained in the channel's specific visual aesthetic. Then, a lead editor would stitch it all together seamlessly. He found this segmentation just drastically increased how many videos the team could produce.
That's clever. And his team management philosophy sounds refreshingly simple. Anti-meeting.
Absolutely. He actively structured things to avoid meetings. Responsibilities are super clear. When person A finishes their task, they pass it directly to person B, workflow.
Got it.
And for complex feedback or instructions, he avoids calls. He uses tools like Loom for screen recordings. He can just show exactly what he means, point to things on screen.
Instead of trying to explain it vaguely in a meeting?
Precisely. Much clearer, much faster.
What of that tech stack he uses? Did the source mention specifics?
Yeah, it lists the usual suspects for creative work: Premiere Pro, After Effects, Photoshop. Communication apparently evolved from Skype early on to Slack. Notion seems to be the central hub for project management now because it's so flexible. Google Docs and Drive for scripts, file sharing. And he mentioned using tools like Dropbox Replay or Frame for video reviews, although he did note some frustrations with Frame at some point.
Standard stuff, but integrated into a system. And when teams get bigger, say 4 or 5 people doing the same role, like editing,
He delegates. He mentioned drawing inspiration from ideas like Jocko Willink's extreme ownership. He appoints a lead within that specific subteam, a lead editor, a lead writer, and he communicates primarily through that lead.
smart, keeps things streamlined. Avoids him becoming the bottleneck.
Exactly. He doesn't try to manage every single individual directly once the team grows.
Okay, let's talk hiring secrets. The source shares some pretty blunt advice here.
Yes, his approach is definitely direct, maybe even blunt, but seemingly effective. He just bypasses resumes and cover letters entirely.
Really? So what does he ask for?
The very first thing, the candidate's top 3 work examples. That's it. Show me what you can do.
And then, I think the phrase was, test fast, fire fast.
That's the one. He means test their actual ability to do the specific job very quickly. Ideally, get a test task back within maybe 24 hours. If it's not a clear fit, if the quality isn't there, he moves on immediately. No delay.
Sounds harsh, but he argues it's fairer.
Yeah, his rationale is it's fairer to everyone. The applicant isn't left hanging for weeks, wondering. And he finds the right person for the role much faster. Saves everyone time.
Where does he find these people?
LinkedIn and Upwork are highlighted in the source as his preferred platforms, especially for finding that international talent we talked about.
Okay. And one other interesting detail was his stance on hiring fans of his channel.
Right, he avoids it. The source doesn't spell out every reason, but it implies there could be complications.
Like what? Blurring professional lines, maybe?
Perhaps. Or making it harder to give direct critical feedback. Or maybe hiring someone based on their enthusiasm for him, rather than purely their skill for the job. It seems he wants people focused squarely on the task at hand.
Makes sense. Okay, so moving from building the team to building the actual content, the source breaks down this science, or maybe art, of viral videos. He uses an analogy, doesn't he? A chain.
Yes, this chain concept is crucial in his thinking. Because success on YouTube, he argues, isn't just about the video itself in isolation. It starts way, way upstream. It begins with the core channel idea. Is the channel concept itself strong? Then the specific video idea for that channel.
Okay, the foundation.
Then comes the gateway, the title and thumbnail. That's the click decision.
Yeah.
Only after that comes the hook, those crucial first 30 to 60 seconds.
Got it.
Then the main video content itself. And finally, maybe a call to action. Every single link in that chain needs to be strong or the whole thing falls apart.
And he really stresses the title and thumbnail, calling them particularly critical on YouTube compared to, say, TikTok or Instagram with their infinite scroll.
Right. Because on YouTube, viewers are actively presented with choices. They have to choose to click your video out of a sea of options. The title and thumbnail together are the promise. They're the offer. They absolutely must work together to compel that click. If they don't, nothing else matters.
His advice on how to make compelling thumbnails is fascinatingly counterintuitive.
It really is. He suggests copying successful title and thumbnail formats, but, and this is key, not from your direct competitors in the same niche.
Let's look elsewhere.
Exactly. Look at channels in completely different niches. Find a title-thumbnail combination over there that clearly resonated, got huge clicks. These combinations are proven winners in terms of grabbing attention, right? They tap into something psychologically. But when you apply that proven format to your niche, it feels fresh and unique to your audience because they haven't seen it there before.
While still leveraging tested clip triggers. He notes that lots of big YouTubers actually do this.
Yeah, he says it's pretty common practice among top creators. It's about understanding what works fundamentally to capture attention.
He even has this primitive brain test he uses for thumbnails.
Yeah, I liked that. He'll apparently scroll through YouTube almost mindlessly, like with his brain half off.
He's zoning out.
Kind of, just to see if a thumbnail instinctively catches his eye, grabs his attention without him having to consciously analyze it or think about it. If it passes that basic subconscious interest test, it's probably effective. It cuts through the noise.
Okay, so you get the click. Then the hook is everything, right?
Absolutely. Those first 30 to 60 seconds are totally make or break. You have to immediately grab the viewer, get them invested somehow, create curiosity. He talks about using the open loop concept.
Right, like in movies. You mentioned the Dark Knight example from the source, starting right in the middle of that tense bank robbery.
Exactly. It immediately throws you in, leaves you wondering, what's going on? Who are these guys? How are they going to pull this off? It creates questions.
Questions that you need the rest of the movie, or in this case the video, to answer. It pulls you in.
That's the idea. Create a question, a mystery, some kind of unresolved tension early on that compels the viewer to stick around for the resolution. Keep them watching.
Where does he actually find his video ideas? Especially if he's not relying heavily on traditional SEO, keyword research for these viral focused channels.
He looks for outliers. He scans channels, maybe in totally unrelated niches that have mostly low views, but then suddenly one video pops off with way more views than the rest.
Suggesting the idea itself was powerful, even if the channel wasn't generally successful.
Precisely. It signals strong topic interest. He also mines other platforms, Instagram, TikTok, looking for trending concepts or interesting stories, and he takes suggestions from his network, his audience.
And he's talked about finding market gaps too, hasn't he? Like the evil food supply channel idea?
Yes, that's a great example from the source. He noticed areas on YouTube, like alternative health, had tons of viewer interest, high search volume maybe, but the content itself was often, well, maybe boring, or not presented in a compelling, high-quality documentary style.
Especially for a male audience, perhaps?
Yes. Right. He saw a gap for that specific format, engaging, well-produced health content aimed at a broader audience, maybe leaning slightly male, interested in those topics. He uses the analogy of opening a restaurant in a super crowded city like New York. Don't just open another generic pizza place. Find the cuisine, the niche, the experience that's missing.
That makes sense. Find the gap. He also applies a framework for the ideas themselves, right?
Right.
Depending on if the topic is new or already covered.
Yeah, basically. If the idea seems brand new to YouTube, if no one's really covered it well, then make a comprehensive overview video, introduce the topic. But if the topic is already well covered, you need to find a unique angle. Don't just make another generic video about, say, Jeffrey Epstein. Focus specifically on how he made money through his Ponzi scheme or some other distinct aspect. Find a fresh perspective.
Interesting. What about analytics? Does he just obsess over click-through rate, CTR, and watch time?
He looks at them, of course, but his view, according to the source, is a bit more nuanced. He suspects YouTube's algorithm is probably more complex than just those two core metrics.
Also?
He thinks it potentially considers a much wider range of engagement signals. Things like comments, likes, shares, maybe even really subtle things like how viewers interact with the video player mouse movements, scrolling behavior, who knows. He's apparently seen videos with perfectly decent CTR and watch time that just never take off, while others that seem to generate more, I don't know, intangible buzz or deeper engagement seem to do better. It's complex.
He uses an analogy to Amazon sometimes.
Yeah, like on Amazon, finding those high-traffic keywords with relatively low competition is key, right? And then you need a great product image, like your thumbnail. Combining the right opportunity, the idea, the gap, with the right presentation, title thumbnail, is crucial on YouTube, just like finding the right product niche and having a great hero image is on Amazon.
And based on all this, what does he see as the single most overlooked lever for creators? Where do people misplace their effort?
He argues pretty strongly that most creators spend way, way too much time and energy, maybe like 90% obsessing over the video editing itself, perfecting every cut, every graphic,
And not enough on it?
and only maybe 10% on the truly foundational elements. The core channel idea, the specific video idea, and crucially, the title and thumbnail.
He suggests flipping that ratio significantly, right? Maybe closer to 50-50.
Exactly. Because his point is, if that foundation isn't rock solid, if the channel concept isn't compelling, if the video idea doesn't grab people, or if the title and thumbnail fail to get the click, then nobody will ever see that beautifully edited video anyway.
All that editing effort is wasted if the core idea and packaging aren't right.
Precisely. This reinforces the importance of brand, which he views fundamentally as a promise. Like, Toyota promises reliability, or Taylor Swift promises a certain kind of musical experience. A channel's brand is the consistent promise of the content it delivers.
Which is why he segments content across different channels, like his main Jake Tran channel versus Evil Food Supply.
Right. His main channel has a brand promise around money, power, war, crime, that kind of darker, historical, analytical content. Evil Food Supply has a totally different promise around health, ingredients, alternative wellness. Trying to mix those would dilute both brands. Segmenting keeps the promise clear for each audience.
Okay, so you've got the content engine running, it resonates, the audience is growing. How do you actually scale the income beyond just YouTube AdSense? He mentioned a simple rule from his mentor.
Yeah, it's almost deceptively simple. Do more of what's already making money. If one video reliably makes X amount of money and you've built a system through outsourcing to consistently produce high-quality videos like that.
Just make more videos.
Exactly. Simply increasing the upload frequency, which the outsourced team enables, directly increases revenue. You're not personally working double the hours to achieve it. You're scaling the system.
And this thinking naturally leads to the decision to launch multiple channels and diversify revenue streams.
Right. It's partly about creating multiple income streams, reducing reliance on any single channel or platform, but it's also about having outlets to explore different interests or opportunities that might not fit the brand promise of the main channel.
Which is how he ended up venturing into physical products with Evil Goods, starting with that beef tallow balm.
Yes, apparently born from his own personal interest in the alternative health space. He saw a market gap there, just like he finds channel ideas. He noticed a lack of certain types of products or specific formulations.
And he didn't just dabble, did he? He approached it like a serious business from day one.
Totally. He viewed it as a full business needing a dedicated team right from the start. The source mentions him cold emailing over 50 potential manufacturers to find the right partner. And a really crucial step seems to have been partnering with someone known as Rob the Bank, who apparently brought serious e-commerce expertise and mentorship experience to the table.
And he even applied lessons learned from YouTube to the product side.
Yeah, that's interesting, like using the same principles of compelling visual design that make a great thumbnail and applying those to the product packaging and labeling, and leveraging the channel's existing brand story and audience trust to build the narrative around the product itself.
Smart synergy. Looking at his overall revenue breakdown now, the source reveals something interesting about where the money comes from.
It does. Apparently, the Evil Goods physical product venture currently generates the most raw revenue. The top line is biggest there.
Right.
But the profit from that is being heavily reinvested back into scaling the business, hiring, inventory, marketing. That's the equity play. He's building an asset. Sponsors and his own information products are apparently the next largest streams in terms of actual take-home cash flow currently. And then YouTube AdSense is after that.
Okay, so this really highlights a big shift in his thinking, doesn't it? Moving from focusing purely on generating cash flow to actively building equity and long-term wealth.
Yes, he explicitly talks about this shift. He suggests it typically happens after you reach a certain income level, maybe around $100,000 a month or so. You start thinking differently. Faceless YouTube channels, he says, are fantastic for generating that initial cash flow, getting you off the ground, proving concepts, but building product businesses, investing in other assets, that's how you build significant, lasting net worth and equity.
And his personal goal is ambitious.
Very. The source mentions a target net worth of $40 to $100 million.
Wow. And to get there, he seems to have really embraced the philosophy from that book, The One Thing.
Yes, focusing intensely. Right now, that means pouring his primary focus and energy into scaling the Evil Goods product business, rather than trying to juggle too many major initiatives at once, one big bet at a time.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly, but it feels connected to his overall way of looking at the world and analyzing systems. The source also dives into his views on, well, societal systems and what some people might label conspiracies. His core belief here seems to be that human nature hasn't really fundamentally changed over time.
Right, meaning the same kinds of evil stuff, manipulation, power plays, exploitation that happened throughout history isn't gone. It just presents itself in maybe more complex or polished modern forms today.
So he encourages looking critically at power structures, suggesting influence isn't always where we think it is.
Exactly. He prompts looking beyond the obvious public figures, presidents, CEOs we see in the news. He suggests, based on the source, that real influence might lie more with, say, deep-rooted private wealth, entrenched bureaucratic power, or specific complexes like the military-industrial one, people or groups who operate outside the main spotlight.
And as an example of applying this kind of critical lens, the source mentions his perspective on the education system. How does he see that?
Well, his view, as presented in the source, is that the modern education system, tracing its roots back historically, was potentially designed less to foster truly independent critical thinking
And more
to condition people to follow instructions precisely, to wait for direction, to perform tasks as assigned, preparing them, essentially, for roles in a structured workforce, like factories initially, rather than fostering the kind of entrepreneurial problem-solving or contrarian thinking often needed to build wealth or challenge systems.
Interesting. And that critical thinking extends to how he analyzes business dynamics, too, looking beyond the surface narrative.
Yes, absolutely. The source gives examples, like his take on the history of the recycling symbol. We see it as this green environmental thing, right?
The chasing arrows.
But his perspective, based on the source material he cites, is that it actually originated from plastic companies, companies rooted in big oil. He views it as essentially a brilliant marketing tactic
A tactic to do what?
to kind of greenwash plastic use, to make consumers feel okay about single-use plastics because, hey, it's recyclable. Even though, as he points out, actual recycling rates for plastic are incredibly low, like maybe 10%, with most ending up in landfills or the environment.
Leading to concerns about microplastics and health impacts, like endocrine disruption.
Right, so it's questioning the narrative versus the underlying interests and outcomes. Another example cited is his view on Nestle's historical marketing of baby formula in developing countries. He frames it as masterful manipulation.
How so, according to the source?
Targeting vulnerable populations, maybe using doctors or nurses to introduce it, giving just enough free samples to potentially disrupt natural breast milk production, thereby creating dependence on their product, which might not have been the healthiest option. Again, looking at the tactics and consequences beneath the surface marketing.
So it seems less about believing in shadowy, complex conspiracies across the board and more about applying a consistent critical framework, understanding power, motivation, incentives, and how systems really operate.
That feels like a fair summary based on the material. It's about looking beyond the official story, beyond the obvious players, and asking, who benefits? What are the underlying mechanics, whether it's economic systems, political influence, how wealth is stored and moved, like why the super rich buy art?
Right, the source mentioned that using it as an asset class for tax advantages, often stored away, not even displayed.
Yeah, or looking at things like the Wagner Group's business model, which the source explains was based on an earlier private military company model fighting wars for nations in exchange for cuts of their natural resources. Or identifying the most lucrative businesses as often being those protected by government monopolies or non-competitive contracts, because ultimate power often ties back to the state's monopoly on force.
And questioning societal norms too, like the standard 40-hour workweek, which he traces back historically as potentially a management tool to keep workers just comfortable enough not to revolt, but not free enough to gain real independence.
Exactly. Or how government systems, through things like debt, especially mortgages where you pay mostly interest up front, and taxes, can inadvertently trap people in cycles of working just to service obligations, hindering wealth creation. It's a framework of critical analysis applied broadly.
Okay, let's bring it back to his personal philosophy and habits, outside of just business strategy. The source mentions his high school experience again being a bit of a loner.
Yes, and he views it positively in retrospect. Less social pressure, he thinks, made it less daunting or weird for him to pursue something unconventional, like starting a YouTube channel back then. And his current friend group, interestingly, seems to mostly be people he met through YouTube. He emphasizes they push each other to grow and achieve more.
That makes sense. His views on materialism are also quite distinct, mentioning he went through a minimalist phase.
Yeah, he seems to see physical possessions as potentially weighing you down, taking up mental energy, creating worry. He expresses a preference, even now when he can likely afford to buy, for renting or leasing major assets like houses or cars, primarily for the freedom and flexibility it provides, freedom from the burdens of ownership.
Interesting, and he's clearly very focused on personal health optimization as a foundation.
Hugely. He talks about the importance of getting hormones like testosterone and micronutrients, vitamins, minerals properly tested and optimized. His rationale is that modern food might be less nutrient dense than it used to be, and underlying deficiencies can seriously hinder your energy, performance, even muscle gain, no matter how well you eat or exercise.
So it's foundational.
He sees it as absolutely foundational. He credits getting his own levels tested and optimized with significant improvements in his energy and overall health. It's a performance lever for him.
But maybe the most powerful takeaway, the thing he calls his thinking epiphany, and apparently his single best piece of advice, it comes back to how he solves problems.
This really stood out in the source material. He had this realization that the biggest breakthroughs, the significant jumps in his progress and wealth, didn't just come from grinding harder, working more hours. They came from the simple, dedicated act of sitting down, often just with a paper and pen, and deeply thinking through a problem, brainstorming solutions, analyzing angles.
And he contrasts this sharply with how he feels the education system often conditions us, right?
Yes. He feels it often conditions us not to think independently, but rather to wait for instructions, to follow procedures, to execute tasks given to us.
So the message is, working hard is essential, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. You also have to think hard.
That's exactly it. Deep, focused thinking is the unlock. He specifically credits doing an exercise from the book Blue Ocean Strategy, which required this kind of structured, deep thinking as being absolutely key to finding his initial breakthrough channel idea and overcoming major hurdles.
Thinking is a deliberate practice. He's also a big believer in continuous learning and mentorship, too.
Definitely. The source mentions him investing significantly, like maybe $10,000 a month at times, in coaching and further education to help him constantly reach the next level. Never stop learning.
And just briefly, the source also notes his background in martial arts.
Yeah, Taekwondo, BJJ, Muay Thai. And interestingly, his view of firearms training as the ultimate martial art, purely from a self-protection standpoint.
Okay, so we've really taken a deep dive here into a pretty remarkable story. The journey from that hated $80 K job to building this multi-million-dollar online content and product empire. We've unpacked the strategic layers that step-by-step approach to scaling with outsourcing, the very distinct hiring philosophy, the anti-meeting management style.
We've explored those crucial elements of viral content creation, from the absolute foundation of the channel and video idea, the critical title and thumbnail, to the essential hook. And his views on analytics, why focus maybe needs to shift away from just editing towards those foundational pieces.
We've looked at that important evolution in thinking from pure cash flow generation towards deliberately building equity through diversification, like launching the physical products venture, driven by personal interests but executed with strategic partnerships.
And we've touched on his broader critical framework for viewing societal systems, power structures, and business dynamics, seeing how that same analytical thinking helped him identify market gaps and opportunities.
And perhaps most importantly, we've highlighted aspects of the personal journey, the unexpected upside of being a loner early on, the value he places on freedom over owning stuff, the intense focus on health as a foundation, and that ultimate power he found unlocked by simply dedicating time to think. Understanding these dynamics, online business, scaling, critical thinking, personal growth drawn directly from the source material you provided is hopefully incredibly valuable for your own learning, your own endeavors.
Absolutely. And maybe here's a final thought for you to chew on, building directly on that powerful idea of working hard versus thinking hard. If, as this expert suggests, based on his analysis, systems in the world, maybe including parts of education or traditional work structures, are often designed more to produce people who follow instructions effectively rather than independent creators of wealth and solutions. Where are you currently dedicating most of your energy? How much untapped potential could you unlock? Not necessarily by working more hours, but by deliberately setting aside focused time, maybe just like him, with a paper and pen to deeply think through your own challenges, your own goals, and the unique opportunities sitting right there in front of you, rather than just jumping to the next task or waiting for the next instruction. Food for thought. YouTube channel back then. And his current friend group, interestingly, seems to mostly be people he met through YouTube. He emphasizes they push each other to grow and achieve more.
That makes sense. His views on materialism are also quite distinct, mentioning he went through a minimalist phase.
Yeah, he seems to see physical possessions as potentially weighing you down, taking up mentalness, energy, creating worry. He expresses a preference, even now when he can likely afford to buy, for renting or leasing major assets like houses or cars, primarily for the freedom and flexibility it provides, freedom from the burdens of ownership.
Interesting. And he's clearly very focused on personal health optimization as a foundation.
Hugely. He talks about the importance of getting hormones like testosterone and micronutrients, vitamins, minerals properly tested and optimized. His rationale is that modern food might be less nutrient dense than it used to be, and underlying deficiencies can seriously hinder your energy, performance, even muscle gain, no matter how well you eat or exercise.
So it's foundational.
He sees it as absolutely foundational. He credits getting his own levels tested and optimized with significant improvements in his energy and overall health. It's a performance lever for him.
But maybe the most powerful takeaway, the thing he calls his thinking epiphany, and apparently his single best piece of advice, it comes back to how he solves problems.
This really stood out in the source material. He had this realization that the biggest breakthroughs, the significant jumps in his progress and wealth, didn't just come from grinding harder, working more hours. They came from the simple, dedicated act of sitting down, often just with a paper and pen, and deeply thinking through a problem, brainstorming solutions, analyzing angles.
And he contrasts this sharply with how he feels the education system often conditions us, right?
Yes. He feels it often conditions us not to think independently, but rather to wait for instructions, to follow procedures, to execute tasks given to us.
So the message is, working hard is essential, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. You also have to think hard.
That's exactly it. Deep, focused thinking is the unlock. He specifically credits doing an exercise from the book Blue Ocean Strategy, which required this kind of structured, deep thinking as being absolutely key to finding his initial breakthrough channel idea and overcoming major hurdles.
Thinking is a deliberate practice. He's also a big believer in continuous learning and mentorship, too.
Definitely. The source mentions him investing significantly, like maybe $10,000 a month at times, in coaching and further education to help him constantly reach the next level. Never stop learning.
And just briefly, the source also notes his background in martial arts.
Yeah, Taekwondo, BJJ, Muay Thai. And interestingly, his view of firearms training as the ultimate martial art, purely from a self-protection standpoint.
Okay, so we've really taken a deep dive here into a pretty remarkable story. The journey from that hated $80 K job to building this multi-million-dollar online content and product empire. We've unpacked the strategic layers that step-by-step approach to scaling with outsourcing, the very distinct hiring philosophy, the anti-meeting management style.
We've explored those crucial elements of viral content creation, from the absolute foundation of the channel and video idea, the critical title and thumbnail, to the essential hook. And his views on analytics, why focus maybe needs to shift away from just editing towards those foundational pieces.
We've looked at that important evolution in thinking from pure cash flow generation towards deliberately building equity through diversification, like launching the physical products venture, driven by personal interests but executed with strategic partnerships.
And we've touched on his broader critical framework for viewing societal systems, power structures, and business dynamics, seeing how that same analytical thinking helped him identify market gaps and opportunities.
And perhaps most importantly, we've highlighted aspects of the personal journey, the unexpected upside of being a loner early on, the value he places on freedom over owning stuff, the intense focus on health as a foundation, and that ultimate power he found unlocked by simply dedicating time to think. Understanding these dynamics, online business, scaling, critical thinking, personal growth drawn directly from the source material you provided, is hopefully incredibly valuable for your own learning, your own endeavors.
Absolutely. And maybe here's a final thought for you to chew on, building directly on that powerful idea of working hard versus thinking hard. If, as this expert suggests, based on his analysis, systems in the world, maybe including parts of education or traditional work structures, are often designed more to produce people who follow instructions effectively rather than independent creators of wealth and solutions. Where are you currently dedicating most of your energy? How much untapped potential could you unlock? Not necessarily by working more hours, but by deliberately setting aside focused time, maybe just like him, with a paper and pen to deeply think through your own challenges, your own goals, and the unique opportunities sitting right there in front of you, rather than just jumping to the next task or waiting for the next instruction. Food for thought.